What is going on, men? I thought we would do an episode that would do well on both Alpha Male Podcast and Gunfighter Life. If you don't listen to both, at least consider it. But common street weapons. I've talked about my bio. I took the full-length bio out of most of the modern episodes, but military, law enforcement, private security contracting. I've worked some of the nastiest streets in this country and been deployed overseas. I've seen a lot of street weapons. And I thought I would talk about commonly used street weapons. That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the podcast. Hopefully we keep God Almighty at the center, biblical Judeo-Christian values, and real-world firsthand experience. I'm blessed to serve you as host. Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Okay, so I'm going to start this off with a story. When I was in L.A.P.D. going through the police academy, we had to write reports. A lot of the job is report writing. People think cops are like gunfighters, and I've tried to buck against that trend here on the podcast and talk about somebody that was a former police officer. Unless you're in a specialized role, you're basically a clerk, an administrator. You write reports. You get very little firearms training. I mean, compared to the average civilian maybe, but compared to an actual gunfighter, not much. A lot of your stuff is report writing. So you'd better be well-versed in English, in literature, and in the law, the penal code. That's the bulk of your job. Well, anyway, report writing. In one of the reports in the police academy, it was a report writing about it was probably an ADW, assault with a deadly weapon, and the elements of the crime. And the weapon was a screwdriver. Man stabs other man with screwdriver. And I thought, that's kind of ridiculous. Why would they do that? Why wouldn't they use a knife? And then, rookie boot me got out on the street and realized, these people actually use screwdrivers quite a bit. Why? Because California has outlawed many things, even many pocket knives, even many knives are felonies to have in California. If I remember correctly, under 12020 California Penal Code. That's been a long time ago, but it's funny the things that you remember. But a lot of just common everyday tools, they have made felonies. So people are still going to be armed and stab each other and kill each other. So what are they going to do? They're going to use other things. One of the most common things they use is a screwdriver. If you think about your average pocket knife, which a lot of them are felonies in California to carry, not all, but a lot, a folding pocket knife, 3-inch blade, whatever, a screwdriver is a way more wicked weapon. Like a decent-sized flathead or Phillips head screwdriver, which is basically, let's be honest, an ice pick, is a way more deadly weapon. Except per the penal code, you can't make it a weapon. It's a tool. But let's be real, it's a weapon. When you get a homeless guy carrying a giant screwdriver on his strong side, quickly deployable, it's probably not for fixing the wobbly wheel on his shopping cart. It's probably for stabbing other people. And to be fair, he has the right to self-defense. If he's the good guy and somebody is attacking him, he should have the right to defend himself. It's kind of sad that he has to use a screwdriver if he's the good guy, and it's kind of nasty that they're using screwdrivers if they're the bad guy. But it's a tool. But my point is, it's a commonly used street tool, and it kind of gave me the idea for this episode. I thought that anecdote and that would serve well to kind of talk about this topic. Now, I've done an entire other episode, a much older episode on improvised weapons. A lot of things are improvised weapons, so I'm not going to rehash a bunch of that here. Maybe I'll put that out or add it into this episode at the end, or maybe I'll put it out in the same week, or maybe I'll forget. But this is not just improvised weapons. Pretty much anything can be a weapon. We're not going to talk about like a folding chair like in the old WWF. Right, we're not talking about improvised weapons. We're talking about common street weapons. The screwdriver being a quintessential one of those. I'm also not going to be talking about things that are actually weapons that thugs use, like brass knuckles. That's an actual weapon. That's not what we're talking about. But in keeping with that, what's something you can use that's like brass knuckles, but is not brass knuckles, that you could carry pretty much anywhere, to the airport, to anywhere you want? And that would be a roll of nickels or a roll of dimes. Maybe a roll of quarters. My hands aren't that big. I think I'd get better strikes with a roll of dimes or nickels. But or pennies, but a roll of change. That can greatly increase your striking ability. Legal pretty much anywhere. But a roll of nickels, that's kind of a common classic one. You know, you want a little bit of extra striking power when you're going to town on somebody. The roll of change is a good and commonly used street weapon. In today's day and age, you know, unless they have a bunch of just random stuff, if somebody just has a roll of nickels in their pocket, you know, that's a pretty good indicator of, you know, maybe something to pay attention to. The guy's got cauliflower ear and a roll of nickels. Maybe do a little bit of extra precautions if you're going to tangle with that dude. Okay, so that's another one. Change. Another real common one came to me the other day, and that is really thick copper wire. I was removing a hot tub. My wife and I are blessed to have bought a little cabin out in the woods. It came with an old crappy hot tub. It was more of a cesspool. But I was ripping it out, and the thing that ran power to it was a giant, big, heavy, rubber-coated thing of copper wire. And I thought about keeping it just for this reason, but I've got a ton of weapons. I don't need improvised street weapons. But I was like, man, if you hit somebody with that, you'd likely kill them, even with a 1 or 2 foot length of that. And it's a wicked weapon, but it's not a weapon. It's just a piece of wire. It's just a section of wire. I'm not talking about like an extension cord. I'm talking about a really thick, you know, inch thick piece of copper that's coated in rubber. It's a bludgeon. It's a cudgel. It's a mace, you know, whatever you want to consider it as a modern version of, but it can be used as a nasty weapon. Could be a common street weapon because it's so easily salvageable. You know, people that are in construction or demolition or things like that, you could just get like I probably had a 10-foot section of that. I could have cut up into 1 or 2 foot sections. And it's basically free because I was getting rid of it anyway. One of the reasons it's a common street weapon. Another one, so classic, it's kind of cliche, the tire iron. You know, something you can have in your vehicle, even in the most Orwellian of states, right? Even in New Jersey or Maryland or whatever you're traveling through. Hopefully you don't live there, so I feel sorry for you. But even in your, you know, horrible European countries where you're forced on your knees as far as defense go, you have a car, you're in your car, you can probably have a tire iron. Why do you have a tire iron in your driver's side door? For changing tires, right? But it's a wicked, wicked weapon. It is a modern mace, if you're familiar with medieval weapons. It's a cudgel. It's a nasty, deadly weapon. It is a tire iron. You have it for changing tires. But that is so classic as to be quintessential. Man attacks man with tire iron, right? Talking about automotive stuff, keys. Now, this is not a great weapon, but going back to like the roll of nickels, it's a force multiplier if you're going to punch or hit somebody. Now, you have to know how to punch or hit. Telling some lady, oh, just use keys in your hand. Well, if they don't know how to strike somebody in the face normally, the keys in the hand probably aren't going to do them much good if they're like a limp-wristed, get away from me. Keys aren't really going to help that. But if they know how to actually strike, they give a quick, you know, left, right, left, and an elbow to the face, and then some keys to the eyes, because some guy's trying to use their body without their permission, right? Those keys are a force multiplier. But you have to know how to strike. But keys, you know, carried with the key ring in the palm and the keys coming out through the fingers, yeah, it's really going to hurt your hand if you strike somebody really hard, but it's going to hurt them worse. Newsflash, you've ever punched somebody in the face? It hurts. Equally important in knowing how to fight. If you've ever been punched in the face, it hurts worse. You're going to get more pain on both ends if you strike with keys. Another one that takes some doing is a sock or 2 socks full of whatever that's hard, that is heavy, that's suitable for the purpose. So like 2 socks tied together and one of them is filled with loose change, going back to nickels or dimes or pennies, nuts and bolts, heck, rocks if they're the appropriate size. But 2 fairly sturdy socks tied together, you know, the ghetto version of nunchucks, they're a nasty weapon and they have a lot of reach. As long as the socks are sturdy enough to take it, but that's a nasty weapon. Another one that works kind of the same way, and this is common on the street, fairly common, is a padlock. A lot of people, even if they're homeless or street people or whatever you want to call them, transients, the unhoused, right, whatever term you want to use, they'll have padlocks to secure their stuff. They don't want to get stolen. Their bike, their shopping cart, their backpack, or whatever. And that padlock is a wicked weapon. It's not something they can get in trouble for having, like a screwdriver. It's something they can have on them as a weapon. If they live, sadly, a lot of times a very violent existence. And that padlock, like a bike chain or a padlock with a chain on it or a dedicated, those old turn kind of bike padlocks, you start swinging that thing around, that's a deadly weapon. So beware of those things. Another real common one is just scrap wood because it's available. A lot of times people don't secure that when they're working on job sites or construction or demolition, and people that are walking by can just grab it. Like, this 4x4, this, 2 or 3 foot 2x4, this is a decent, nasty weapon. Might want to keep it around. Those are something you might encounter. Now, my goal in doing this is twofold. One, for you to be aware of it if you're encountering this kind of situation, to realize what might be about to go down, to give you some more situational awareness, right? You see a guy, something sparks your interest about, maybe I should pay attention to this person. And yeah, maybe they have a bike, but instead of the bike chain being wrapped around the handlebars, it's hanging out of their pocket, right? Like maybe that's a pretty good indicator. Going back to the example I use, you're watching somebody take stuff out of their pockets. You notice they take a roll of nickels out of their pocket, not real common today. Maybe they have cauliflower ear. You can tell by looking at their nose it's been broken a few times, etc. Like, maybe that's a pretty good indicator. This guy knows how to throw down. You see if you use public transportation, right? You see somebody get on public transportation and they've got a backpack, and in the front or the side of the backpack they have a giant screwdriver and no other tools. Not like they're a handyman. They don't have like a tool belt full of tools. They have like a backpack or something, or a shopping bag, and sticking out of it is the handle of a screwdriver. That's there for a reason, right? That could be the good guy. I'm not saying that these people are bad. I'm just saying situational awareness, right? If he's got, a couple of trash bags or shopping bags or whatever, and one of them's got a pretty big screwdriver sticking out of it, it's probably not for fixing loose screws, at least not primarily for that. So that's one of the reasons for doing this episode. Another one is for you. No matter how well armed you are, talking to somebody who still, his primary breadwinning job is as a private security contractor, jungle boots, war belt, body armor, guns, baton, all kinds of stuff. But there are times where I might find myself unarmed. Well, all these are things that you, even in most environments, you could have on you. Right? Even at the airport, you could have a roll of nickels. You could think about when you're packing, right? I can carry a couple of extra sturdy, long tube socks and a bag of loose change. Multifunctional, right? I have an extra pair of socks and I have loose change for places that still take change, but also, as we talked about, that could be a pretty nasty weapon if I'm in an environment where I've been stripped of my ability to protect myself with normal means, and I've got some, guy that takes the Quran seriously, and I need to put him down. Because per his religion, the only way to surely get to heaven is to kill non-Muslims. And you can get mad at that if you want, but have you read the text? If I got to deal with that and I've been stripped of my normal ability to protect myself, that's better than nothing. So kind of a twofold approach and two-pronged reason for doing this episode. I hope it was somewhat useful and thought-provoking. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate all that you do. The idea of this was not to scare you. And for that, the verse of the day. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. We weren't called to live in fear. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.